Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you'll find this session interesting. My name's Neil Pitman from a company in the UK called Aquaforest. I'll introduce myself a little bit more further on. But what I hope we can do in this session is start to delve into some technical aspects of why users will sometimes find their PDF files cannot be found by various search engines. And we're going to be looking at Google, we're going to be looking at Office 365, and we're going to be looking at Microsoft Windows 10, and looking at some of the differences there, and looking at some of the differences between different types of PDF files. Now, this whole issue of searchability of PDFs has been in the news recently. So I wonder what people like David Cameron, or Lionel Messi, or the former Prime Minister of Iceland would think about PDF searchability. And I think they probably think PDF searchability is a really bad idea, and we really don't want it, because it allows people to find out a bit more than we might really want them. I think this is quite well publicised around the world. And the reason I mentioned it particularly is actually the first time ever I've seen on primetime BBC television any mention of PDFs, TIFFs, OCR, searchable PDFs. So in our world, that was quite an exciting moment to see the BBC raise that, regardless of the other issues. However, the fact still remains that probably in a lot of cases, please come in. Users' expectations are not met by both the combination of the PDF files and the search technologies that are out there. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. I should just briefly introduce myself. I'm co-founder of Aquaforest Limited, which started back in 2001. We're a UK-based software company. We produce sort of software primarily for high-volume PDF conversion and OCR. It's purely an online sort of sales model, and we've probably got about 2,000 customers in about 50 different countries. So when I look at these 10 different use cases of where users have hit issues, they've all been inspired by different customer examples. And I actually had a look back. I think it was a 10th anniversary. I went back through the release notes of our products to find out when did we have our first product that supported PDFA, actually, and it was actually 10 years ago, which is quite frightening. So just broadly what we're going to do is we're just going to cover off why is PDF searchability so critical, the core business issues that would be quite brief. And then we're actually going to need to sort of look at some of the mechanics of how search engines will actually work, how they access PDF files, and how they build their indexing to support that search. Because what we've got to do is look at the differences in expectations and reality, both in terms of the PDF files and the sort of user belief of what should happen. And what we'll end up with is perhaps the way of looking at some best practices, because for organisations who want to ensure that their content is fully searchable, there are probably a number of things that they want to bear in mind. So what we'll actually do, first of all, we'll just go through, firstly, the costs. And these are the core business issues. You may think of others, but the core ones I tend to think fall into three categories. One is a fundamental sort of legal impact. Any organisations that are subject to a legal discovery mandate or public sector bodies that have to facilitate freedom of information requests, they actually have to have the ability to be sure if they're required to find all documents that mention Lionel Messi in their case files, they need to actually have a way of actually being confident that they can do that. But as we'll go through the presentation, there are many reasons why they actually may not be able to get all of those files. The second one, please come in. I think hopefully there's room. The second issue is really one about decision-making impact. If you're having to make decisions, please come in, or based on incomplete information, because whether it's resulting in acquisition, you haven't actually got access to all the available documents that are actually there, and you only discover perhaps a number of years later, it would have been useful to know that we had these documents before the legal case and not after. And quite often the last one is basically an employee time and cost issue. There's two aspects to that. The most obvious, of course, is how long people actually end up searching for files if they can't find it immediately. But actually, it's quite astonishing how many people end up having to recreate content when just because they couldn't actually find the document, they were actually looking for it. So there's a real business cost in various different aspects. So it's worth organisations actually putting some effort into that. So there's a couple of things we need to understand. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just quickly touch on the actual mechanics of indexing and searching PDF files. And the three specific things we're going to be looking at, we'll look at Google, we'll look at Office 365, and we'll look at Microsoft Windows. Now the core mechanics for actually how search is managed is basically the same for all of these things. These are all the components we need. There needs to be some kind of scheduler that sets up the operation for a content crawler to actually be invoked, and that needs to actually read and parse the sets of PDF files that are candidates for being searched. Various things going on. There's a lot of things in there that will affect the results, as we'll see. Then the other area that can affect it quite significantly is what it then decides to do in terms of actually indexing those files. And then once it's built its index, that's great. That's available there for the users to search, hopefully in a quick way. But at the core, really the whole issue of PDF searchability is very similar, but not quite the same as text extraction or the technology you actually need for accessible PDFs, being able to have some screen reading. Because clearly the search engine needs to extract text. And as we know, even for a perfectly easy to index PDF like this one, it's not necessarily trivial, because PDF isn't just a markup language. It allows us to display things on the page in any way we care to. This file isn't going to be a problem at all, because we can work that out. But as we'll see, there'll be plenty of other cases where it's not quite so simple. And it's useful to look at what pieces of technology are actually used in parsing those PDFs. I don't know what Google does. We can try to infer some things about what Google does when we look at some of the results, but I don't know exactly what technologies they do have. Microsoft Windows is very well known, but confusingly, it's very variable because it's dependent upon the iFilter that's actually used. If you look at this small architecture here, the Microsoft Windows search architecture, the key piece that we're concerned about here is the iFilter, which is the piece that does the text extraction from the PDF. An out-of-the-box instance of Windows 10 has Microsoft's own PDF sort of iFilter, and then clearly if you install a copy of Acrobat or separately install a copy of the Adobe iFilter, you'll see something different. And as we'll see later on, iFilters are not born equal, they're not all the same, and there will be differences there. So Windows is different from the other scenarios in that you can actually control that to a platform. Office 365, again, we're increasingly seeing people placing PDFs in the cloud, of course, and this is one popular way of doing that. And again, we're dependent on the Microsoft PDF format handler for that particular example. Right, we're actually going to take a look at the top 10 reasons now. These are my top 10 reasons, and I'd actually love to have any other reasons any of you other guys can come up with. I know there are others. But these are some I chose, and what we actually did is we put together 10 sample files, and they're actually available on our site. This is quite, please come in. It should be somewhere for you. If you ever actually want to search a specific piece of a website for perhaps purely for PDFs, this is the syntax you can use in Google itself, which can actually be quite useful. And we ran test searches against Google, Office 365, and on Windows 10 using the Adobe 64-bit iFilter, which is the current one, which I think is version 11, which I think is the current one that's available on the site. And what we did with each of those files is run our queries and see what the results are going to be. So, the first most, and probably most obvious reason why a PDF might not be searchable is because it's purely an image. So, if you're using Acrobat and try to search for some text, it does try to helpfully tell you this page only contains a scanned image. Would you like me to run OCR for you? Or if it's one of our developers, they'll just open it up in Notepad++ and say, yeah, that's obviously just an image PDF. Yeah, no problem. So that's probably the single most common scenario. And clearly organisations have got to make sure those files are all identified and actually made searchable or indexable in one way or another. If you have a look at the results of that, there's one slight surprise there, that if you look at the results for Google did actually pass that test, because what Google does is, when it's clearly recognised that we actually have an image PDF, and it's actually run an OCR to extract the text from that image, which is not the case with the other platforms. So most organisations that deal with a lot of these types of documents are familiar with this, but they do need to have a way of telling and identifying which files are already searchable, and this is one issue. And the two other issues really there are, do we really need to create a fully searchable PDF with a text layer, or is it enough, perhaps for our search engine purposes, just to do the OCR and extract the text? There's more than one approach there. And the other aspect of it, do you try to do that at capture time, maybe when it's ingested into a system, or maybe when it's perhaps scanned, or do you do it in place later on? By which I mean, and so many customers could come to us and say something like, I've got this pile of 1 million documents here, I really have got no idea where half of them even came from, we've acquired 3 other companies, all sorts of things could happen. I need a way of actually identifying which ones need to be searched and which ones are already searchable. So, example number 2, moving along, has similarities with the first one, but we tend to call this a partially searchable PDF, we might call it hybrid PDF, or a mixed PDF. So with this actual particular document here, it actually turns out that top patent reference there is actually regular PDF text, whereas the rest of this document is actually just an image. So if we use one of our other favourite tools, PDF Can Opener, I don't know whether you've got any of you guys, we like that tool, Adobe plugin. You can actually quite easily see from the PDF content streams that that's in fact the case. You can actually see the text, and then clearly it's drawing an image for the rest of it. So how did the engines get on with this particular example? Well, the one thing they did at least successfully were able to search on the piece that was actually text, but none of them were able to actually did anything with the underlying image, and that's because they're just not smart enough. Google was able to look at that first PDF and say, hey, there's no text in this PDF, I'm going to run OCR on it. But this is a separate case where there's some text, but also there's an image that does need OCR in. Google wasn't able to do that, and these other ones we wouldn't have expected to, given they didn't handle the first case. So you need something quite smart. You need software that's actually smart enough. It's not enough to just say, can I get some text out of this document or this page? Oh yeah, I can, it must already be searchable. It needs to actually see whether there are meaningful images that need to be OCR'd. Now, one very sort of simple way of doing that would be just to convert everything perhaps to a TIFF and then OCR from there. But that's bad. It's not great, because you then start losing. You don't really want to turn something that's already perfectly good text into an image just to OCR it in case. So really, the smart way of doing it is just by leaving everything in place, but just adding the text layer on top of the PDF purely for the pieces that need it. Now, example number 3. So have any of you ever opened up a PDF file that looks perfectly decent, like this, done some cut and paste, and then had something that looks like that? I see a few signs of recognition, because most, and particularly end users, said, what on earth is actually going on there? By the way, this is another one of our favourite tools. I'm actually using, this is Foxit Viewer, but I don't know whether you may have used it. Foxit's got a very useful text viewer option within it, and actually that's quite nice, because it removes any images. You can actually removes everything else and allows you just to see the text that it thinks it can actually find here. So how do you think any of our search engines are going to get on with that? Well, obviously they can't do anything. So what's actually going on here really? Well, for us to be able to do it text extraction, we've really realistically got to be able to get some Unicode text out of the PDF file, normally with a kind of two Unicode mapping. But if, for whatever reason, it's not there, it still can look like a perfectly reasonable PDF, because it's got a custom font encoding, so the glyphs actually still look like the characters we expect them to, but actually there's no sensible mapping we can actually use. It's almost like a code, actually. If you start looking through the characters, you can say, okay, actually an L is really something else. I know some old PDF software does tend to do this. I don't know whether any PDF software deliberately does this in an attempt to obfuscate. Yeah, some does, yeah. So maybe some. So there's two possible reasons why this might be done. Obviously, we wouldn't really expect any of our search engines to be able to do that. The only, certainly in the case of our customers, adding an OCR text layer does actually work to that, because we don't remove anything that's there, but we basically take a raster copy of the image and OCR that. So it still behaves the same, but it also has a text layer. I don't know whether anyone's got any other solutions to this. Anyone know? I'd like to know. In fact, I'd like to know even how we could sort of reliably know what's going on there. But that's a tough one. Now the next one is what I call the kind of Homer Simpson example, because it's like, dog. Oh, you've got a password on it. Now that's probably the most obvious reason why we can't get the text for it. But it's amazing how common this is. And again, it comes back to organisations with vast numbers of PDF files. Many have come from all different sources. And they've actually found, surprisingly to them, that an awful lot of them are password protected. And quite often the first time they discover this is when they're ploughing through their million documents. They run some sort of one of our tools or someone else's tools, and they start getting a whole load of errors because they can't open it. But this is so common, we've actually had to add a feature to one of our products. As well as having a sort of regular error folder, maybe for corrupt PDF files or other problems, our customer actually specifically, no, we want a special error folder that just has PDFs that have got passwords on them for PDF protection reasons. So it obviously happens, and as long as we're obeying all the rules, we're not going to be able to extract the text. You wouldn't really expect it to be able to do that either. So none of these things here. The other thing, I suppose it's fairly obvious, but the file won't be included in the Google index if it can't get any text for it, as you can say. So what are the solutions to this? Well, there's a few of these points that we'll cover. That just making everything PDFA compliant. If it's your final form document and you want to make sure it's searchable, there's a lot of things you could do. But just having it PDFA compliant is actually a really good first step, because it sort of eliminates the sort of the password and encryption issues, and it does, at least by the fact it's been processed into a PDFA, at least it's reasonably valid. There can still be problems. So I mean, that's probably quite a good thing. But otherwise, there's got to be some auditing or other standards. But for organisations, that's quite a big issue. Now we move on to, we've got 11, I think, reasons really, because this is it's a variant on the first, but this is a bit more subtle. This isn't just an open document. So this is specifically about document security. So if I set to not allowed content copying, page extraction, and so on, I wouldn't expect much software to be able to actually officially be allowed to go and get that. And Adobe does quite prophetically say all Adobe products enforce the restrictions set by the permissioned password. However, not all third-party products enforce them. And it says recipients using such third-party products might be able to bypass some of the restrictions that you've set. Well, so it turns out, because on Windows 10 we're actually using the Adobe iFilter. That actually respects those permissions, so you can't find it. Of course, Office 365 and Google don't worry about any such trivialities as that, and they will happily index that content for you. Some other solutions are there, but from the user point of view, this starts to become. You can start to see some of the potential frustrations that users have, because it's not this particular document, but even these different search engines are actually behaving in different ways. These won't be the only kind of search tools that people use, but there's clearly a number of issues that go up to meeting users' expectations of being able, if they think they should be able to find it, they want to be able to find it. Would you expect, if you've got a PDF file that has an attachment that's also a PDF file, would you expect these guys to be able to locate based on that? So we've got some yes and some no by the sound of it. And the answer is, obviously, it's going to depend. It depends. Actually, this is where iFilters are. So the Adobe iFilter does a good job of that. And the others have no concept of what a PDF attachment actually is. So, and with some of these things, we can't really control that. But again, it's an important issue. If it's critical for your organisation to be able to disclose every document that you've got, and you just need to be aware of these issues, because you might be at risk of having these secret documents that you only find out about in the law case several years later. This next one is another one of our favourite ones. You look at this file, any reasonable user would look at this and, well, I think if I type in the words Farragut Square into a search engine based on this file, I should be able to find that, shouldn't I? Similarly for any of these other phrases. And the answer is, well, sorry buddy, because actually inside the PDF file, this is actually what's going on, because there actually isn't any text in that file whatsoever. It's really just purely vectors and drawing. Everything is drawn there. Now, this is probably both a sort of OCR file processing type opportunity, but also, I don't know, does anyone work in this space? I don't know whether AutoCAD or any of these other tools have got any options now, because wouldn't it be great if they could just add a text layer? Because they know what the text is, because they've built this thing in their tool. It would be great if those kind of tools could actually add this in, because we have got huge numbers of customers. It's tragic to have to go and take these and then OCR them. It's just, because some of these are actually quite difficult to OCR because of the nature of some of it. But that's another good example, and this is again where users can be disappointed. Again, none of these tools can deal with that. The solution we offer for our customers is, okay, you have to identify those, and at least they'll know that it hasn't got any text, but it can't do any more than that without identifying the OCR processes that are actually going to be needed. Right, another good example here. Everyone's favourite document, ISO 32000. Okay, so the question is, well, if I've got something I'm searching for, and in the file, it doesn't appear until page 756, is that going to be a problem? I don't know. Do you think, what's actually going to happen? Okay, are there any limits relating to how big the file is? It's not very big, it's maybe 800 pages to 2 megabytes. But actually, what it turns out, this is how things turn out, Google's got a relatively low limit, so it happily goes up to about 270 pages in this particular case. Does about half a megabyte of text. Now, this probably makes sense for Google because you'd expect its main objective, at least originally, was indexing web pages. So it probably kind of makes sense for it to have some sort of moderate limit. Office 365 gets up to just about 500 pages or so, up to around about a megabyte. And I didn't try to go further with this. So there's two aspects here. There's the combination of the iFilter and the search engine and how much it decides to actually index. So clearly, Adobe iFilter is doing its job and it's certainly at least capable of getting that huge amount of text. And the other thing is the Windows search system is actually happily able to index that. I don't know what the limit is, but there is. And bearing in mind, particularly certain industries like legal industry, that would not be a big document in legal or many other industries, and that's actually quite concerning. So I think the main message there is you probably better know what, if any, limits there actually are, if it's really important for you to find those documents. There may be options you have, depending on what software you're using with search indexing configuration, or worst case, that possibly having to consider splitting documents to work within those limits. But I think once you know the limits are there, I think then you can deal with it. The problem is if this then comes as a surprise and you actually miss critical documents because Lionel Messi only appeared on page 500 before anything else happened. And again, if you're a user and maybe there's let's say a part number, perhaps there's one of the keywords or perhaps in a piece of XMP metadata, or maybe in an annotation that says, don't tell Lionel Messi about this, or whatever it might actually do. There are all these PDFs are very complex objects, as we all know. So there's a lot of pieces in here where a reasonable user might expect to be able to find the PDF based on this particular content. But for the most part, I think they'd be a bit disappointed. Because in general, you try things like keywords, annotations, bookmarks. Mostly these things will fail, but on Windows you can, depending upon the iFilter you're using, get some success. So it's very dependent on the iFilter. Now I've got there's a few I filters to give you an idea. I may be slightly out of date here, which is why I didn't want to put any names on the slide, because I hadn't actually run this test for a little while. But just to give you an example, I've looked at 4 common I filters and found there is a significant difference between them in terms of what they're actually able to look at. So if these things are important to you, if it's important for you to be able to search annotations, other I filters might do better now, but wasn't going to put it on time. But this back in the day. This was, I think this was about 3 years ago. I think I did this, and that was Adobe, that was PDFlib, that's Foxit, and that was Microsoft's format handler. Now that may well have changed in the time, but I think the main message there is the I filters are important, and make sure it meets your needs is basically if you're designing it, and don't expect it to do. Users will automatically expect it to do whatever they believe magically ought to happen, but as we know, that isn't necessarily going to be the case. Okay, another example: PDF forms. What do you think? Do you think Google could do PDF forms? Do you think Office 365 to do PDF forms? Yeah, you think? Yeah, we think yes. Okay. So what we're looking for here is an unflattened PDF form, and this is just the field content. Again, from users, yes, we expect to be able to find that. Yeah, it turns out Google does, Office 365 doesn't, and Windows, certainly with the Adobe I filter, does, and I think the other ones will as well. But the question there is, again, if that's an important aspect of things, maybe flattening would be the most obvious solution, but again, it's just another thing to be aware of, because it's just another sort of more complex aspects of PDFs. And coming in at number 10, in our top 10 list, is bad PDFs, not because this particular PDF is bad. And it's interesting, I think there's another session going on related to PDF validation, and this is where they cross over, because one thing we would love to be able to do is identify, yes, if it's a completely valid PDF, these things shouldn't happen. So in this test, I took a perfectly simple and nice usable PDF, and I just, using a secret tool, quickly I quickly broke it just by, instead of having the number of pages to be 15, the number of pages to be 0. Okay. Now, a lot of the PDF reading software technology out there engineers have probably spent years trying to figure out cases that they try to handle. So how we expect different search systems to behave with this will depend on the nature of the error and the actual search system. But in this particular case, Google blew up, and I don't actually know what Google exactly uses to do its PDF reading, but it failed. Whereas these other guys quite happily were actually able to read it. So clearly there's the two aspects of error dependence, which kind of iFilter or software or parsing technology we're actually using, and what validation would be hugely helpful. I don't know whether in this particular case, but PDFA is another good point, because that at least effectively gives you some sort of basic form of validation. It ensures you aren't going to have a totally and utterly broken PDF, which is actually a good thing. Now, those are my top 10. Has anyone else got any other good examples? Yep.
Deliberately faulty to Unicode mappings.
Deliberately
faulty to Unicode mappings.
Oh wow, okay, that's fairly hardcore. Deliberately faulty. Yeah. Is that like an obfuscation technique?
Yes, that's something that has occurred from one of our customers.
Okay, and they chose to do that themselves, or?
No. They were trying to read one.
Okay.
They got from a third party, and we discovered that after much searching, very much searching, that the to Unicode was faulty by design.
I've seen tag PDF where the tag PDF doesn't match the visual appearance.
Oh, okay.
Or, for example, you'll have misspellings in the tag PDF that you don't have on the,
okay.
in the content stream.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Oh, any other?
Have you tested text with right to left languages?
Yep.
Hebrew, Arabic?
Yep. Yes. Yeah. Any others? Any others?
XFA files would fail probably.
So what's a
Dynamic XFA files would fail probably.
dynamic? Yeah, I haven't. That I probably could have looked at dynamic XFA. That's another. Another possible. I reckon we could get up to 20. Come on, we've got we've got up to about 15.
Lines are too close together vertically.
Okay.
So the text gets mixed.
Right. Okay. So the actual text placement is such that they can't figure out which is on which is on which line. Yeah. Because I remember. I don't know. Did anyone read Duff's article that was posted on the PDFA website a little while ago? It was actually sort of covering off some of these, getting into this area, and I think his example was kind of similar to that. He was basically saying that when you've got a file like this, you can actually, there's no requirement that you actually put any of this text even in vaguely the right order. You put it all over. And one of the possible solutions he was encouraging was tagged PDF. But again, just because of if a screen reader works, then text extraction ought to work. But as you say, there's all these other kind of issues.
PDF portfolio.
PDF.
Portfolio.
Yeah, PDF portfolios. 3 more? Anyone? Oh, okay, we're going to have a think. But I think the other thing then, therefore, is, okay, if we're an organisation and your mission or our mission collectively is to actually make sure people can find PDFs if they ought reasonably be able to, what should best practice encompass? What things perhaps should people be looking at? And there's quite a lot of things to consider here. But I mean, probably one of the first things is really just, what are the business expectations? What are the user expectations? Because depending upon what's actually expected, you have to drive the solution. And maybe just break it to them to say, PDF XFA forms or PDF portfolios. If you can't store your critical things, you need to be able to search in those particular formats. Some sort of auditing and validation, because again, our experience, that password example is so obvious. But actually, if you ask people, okay, out of your 10 million PDFs, how many of them have got open passwords on where you don't even know what the password is? And no, people can't normally answer that. So, some sort of auditing tool is important. Other things, actually understanding your search platform is important, because as I hope we've illustrated, just by looking at 3 different examples of search platforms, we can see that they behave very, very differently. And we can kind of understand why. But again, the actual search platform itself is important. If it's important for you that you've got PDFs that might have 100,000 pages and you need to be able to search all of those 100,000 pages, that's probably going to dictate some of your search platform methods. Could be other limits. Anyway, any other suggestions, or is there anything anyone's used in practice to try to help with some of these issues? I made this kind of starter list for just the things that came to my mind when we were actually looking through this. But some sort of auditing and validation for sure, because the most obvious things here, you certainly don't want obvious things like broken PDFs with passwords on, because that's just silly. So we should be able to have some sort of auditing. PDFA, having PDFA, I think, as a requirement does eliminate some of those particular points. So I mean, that if you just did one thing, if there wasn't any reason not to, PDFA actually will help with a number of these examples, but certainly not all of them. And again, the other things, particularly with the sort of image PDF or the partially image or the vector type diagrams, again, that needs more sort of auditing and analysis. But it gives you a good checklist to go and have a look at, and thank you for the other examples. Any other questions come to mind about this? I mean, the main thing I hope you can take away with you. Clearly, PDF, as we all know, we all advocate, is hugely important. We would advocate the adoption of PDF as the final form of business critical documents. But it is essential that people can actually find those documents through all sorts of text search methods. And it's very clear there's actually a lot of reasons why users' expectations will not actually be met by the tools that are available in conjunction with some of the way that PDFs might actually be generated. So I would encourage in businesses where this is critical, I think it's worth reviewing what best practices are being adopted to actually sort of minimise and mitigate these kind of issues. Because I'm sure you could go out to some of your customers or other people you work with, run some of these tests on a bunch of their files, and they'd probably be a bit surprised. And because it's a negative result, because it's a document not appearing in the set of search results, quite often you don't know till a bit later on that, oh no, why didn't we find that? And then it's only later on you see that. Any other questions at all? No? Good. I think we're okay. We've got a few minutes, but I think it's a good. So happy to wrap up. Yeah, because then you've got to move. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for that. Hope that was useful.